2 Peter chapter 2. Glad all of you could come tonight. Read something today. This lady said they were burning their ditch, and her husband got stung and started swelling up. Just took him to the hospital. She was thankful she was able to swat the bee with the shovel. Joke. Anyway, just thought I'd lighten the mood there for a moment. I guess the moral of the story is if you got to kill a bee on somebody, especially on their face, don't use a shovel.
She wasn't taking it by you. She took one of them.
Well, anyway, talking about destructive doctrines. Peter says, but there were also false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who brought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. Peter knows a thing or two about denying Christ, obviously. He did it 3 times, and Jesus even told him he would. And, of course, he's like, no, not me. But this is far worse. Sunday I talked about, and I only scratched the surface of other religions. But you've got various other religions that talk about, different ways to get to heaven. Beverly had a coworker come to supper one time, and so I was over there with her, and we got to chatting, and so we decided we would talk with the individual about heaven and how to get to heaven and salvation. And just as sure as I'm sitting here, we said, Jesus said, I am the door. He said, well, yeah, but you can go in through a window. And so there's individuals today that believe that, Jesus is not the only way to get to heaven. And so don't ever fool yourself in thinking that everybody believes in Jesus and believes that he is the one to give salvation. Like I did. If you go talk to people, you will find individuals who will basically give you the good person answer. If you died today and you were to go before God and he were to ask you, why should I let you into my heaven, what would you say? And there's a lot of individuals say, well, I've been a good person. I've not killed anybody. I've not stolen anything. I've just tried to help people all my life. And they really believe that, that's going to get them into heaven, and it has nothing to do with Jesus. But, when you study and read the Bible, do you not believe that if there was any other way for mankind to be saved, God would have done it, and his son wouldn't have had to die that cruel, horrible death on that cross? It's awful. The beatings, how they treated him, and everything, and yet he died on a cruel cross for you and I. And so there's individuals, there are individuals who will, come in and actually tell you that, you can't even believe the Bible. I was at a hospital visiting somebody up in kind of northeast Alabama, and there was a guy there who was I don't know what you call it, I guess a volunteer. You know, if you want to check on somebody, he could call the surgery and find out how they're doing or something. He was a deacon, First Baptist Auburn. And he told me, well, you know, you can't believe everything in the Bible. I just so dumbfounded, I just didn't know what to say. And I know I should have said something, but yeah, that's what he said. And there's people who will spread that kind of stuff. And so, you know, they're spreading these heresies, so don't ever think that, well, it don't happen. It does. And so Peter warns us that this kind of stuff will happen. That they are false teachers and that they teach heresy. Let's see. It says that divided into two different categories. The first deals with how to identify or recognize these false teachers. And secondly, Peter talks about the doom which is faced by these false teachers. And we'll get into that in just a moment. And so, how do you recognize a false teacher? I mean, they don't have a thing on front of their forehead that says, hey, I'm a false teacher. Hey, I come disrupt your church. And so, you know, how do you recognize them? How many ever had a Mormon come knock on your door? And, you know, you start listening to them and they sound pretty good.
They make you believe.
Absolutely.
They believe what we believe.
That's right. They'll make you think, well, there ain't nothing wrong with them. Same thing with Jehovah's Witness. But I'll never forget, you know, I realize it's not a big deal, but, you know. But anyway, there was a fella, he was cleaned up a office building and everything. And I think I asked him, it was around Christmas, I said, what you going to do for Christmas? Oh, I'm a Jehovah's Witness. We don't practice Christmas and birthdays.
They don't believe in serving and circusing.
Yeah, so,
Protecting our nation.
so, you know, not even anything to recognize, you know, Christmas or birthdays. But anyway, so some of these people, you know, if they ever come to your door, they'll sound good and they'll sound convincing because they know what they believe. And like I've said before, we don't always know what we believe. Absolutely. Huh, that's good. But yeah, we don't really know what we believe. Says they will secretly bring in destructive heresies. And so why is it important that you kind of find out who it is that you're asking to teach Sunday school?
If they believe in the resurrection from the virgin birth, then he's God's son and he's returning.
Now, I heard a story, supposedly it was true one time, that there was a very influential individual in a particular church, and the pastor just happened to be walking by the classroom and heard this individual talk about there were other ways to get to heaven. And so, I'm not sure who he talked to, but he talked to some individuals about, you know, we can't have that. Well, Pastor, you got to understand. he's a major contributor to our church. And it's either you or him. And so, obviously, the pastor had to leave. Not the guy who was teaching these heresies. So, you got to be careful. You just, it's important to understand who it is you're about to invite to come and be a member of your church. Every time somebody comes and joins the church, I ask them, are you a believer? Have you got saved? Do you know Jesus as your Lord and Savior? Now, I realize I ought to go further than that, and sometimes we do, but so we have to be careful. We just can't sit there and let anybody teach. Also, as we've mentioned, they'll deny the Lord, and we know that Peter obviously did that on 3 separate occasions. And then verse 2. How many will follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of truth will be blasphemed? By covetousness they will exploit you with deceptive words for a long time. Their judgment has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber. So, their covetousness, they will exploit you with deceptive words. So they'll get you in a trap.
Fabricated stories.
Huh?
Fabricated stories.
Absolutely, yeah. They're gonna fabricate stories and everything, and their judgment hasn't been idle. So they're not just kind of they're setting the trap. And it says their destruction doesn't slumber. So they don't rest. Exploit is translated as make merchandise of you. You ever thought about somebody looking at you as merchandise? Which denote the business of buying and selling. James uses the word within the context of buying and selling. And so false teachers exploit people. They use them as merchandise or objects. They're looking at you as some kind of object that they can manipulate and get them to do and help them accomplish what they need to do. Probably one of the things they're going to try to do, obviously, is divide and conquer. And that's not really as hard as it sounds, because someone once told me, and it's really kind of scary, a lot of times in business meetings, especially if you have a kind of a hot topic, you find about 20% of the people will go along with the pastor, the leadership, because they believe that's what they need to do. 20% of the leadership disagrees because they don't, And then the other, I guess 60%, go along with what everybody wants to do. And so, and y'all know that's kind of true, And so, if you've got a big chunk of individuals just willing to go along with whatever, then all you got to do is be very persuasive and convincing, and you're liable to have a group of individuals follow you. How many churches where, the pastor, people didn't agree with him, and yet he goes out the door and there goes the people. Because he's very flamboyant, and they like him, and so they go with him. And it may not always be the right thing, but that's what happens. So we've got to be careful. Verse 4. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly. We'll stop there for a moment. So, as you know, there was a revolt in heaven. Satan took a large portion of the angels. I want to say a third. Am I right? Sounds good. Okay. But anyway, I think it's like a third of the angels, and he convinced them that, they could rule the universe. And so God said, okay, big boys, that's what you want to do. And he created hell, and that's where he put them. And so if he didn't spare them, then do you not believe he's not going to spare the wicked? And so individuals have got themselves convinced, oh, God's not going to do anything. God's not going to put people in a place like that. He loves us too much. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands how many of you had to spank your kids. And if you like my mom and daddy, it hurt them more than it did the child. It wasn't a fun thing for you to do. Now, why in the world would you do it? Because it had to be done. That child could not just continue to do what they do without some type of punishment. Now, I don't know what all nowadays it's set them in the corner, But anyway, so God's not going to spare people who are wicked and who sin. He's created a way, or came up with a way, to offer forgiveness. And it wasn't cheap. And so if individuals choose to rebuff that, choose not to accept the sacrifice that Jesus paid for our sin, that's what they can do. Sometimes when your children get older, you just have to, okay, if that's what you're going to do it. Now, I probably shouldn't tell this story, but I will. Hopefully it won't change your opinion of me. When I was about 16 years old, I experimented with smoking. And my dad smoked. He smoked Camels, and unfiltered, and Mom smoked. And so anyway, me and my cousin, we'd go down. At that time, you could go down to the store and buy cigarettes, you didn't have to be a certain age. And so we'd go get us some cigarettes. And so I hid them somewhere or another in the room, My dad, I don't know why, went in there and he found them. He's painting the house. And I come in from school, and I go over to say hello to him. He said, I found your cigarettes. And he says, is that what you want to do? And I'm like, man, I am in trouble. He's going to kill me. And I said, no, sir. Okay. That's all he ever said. And I never picked them up again. I didn't like smoking anyway. But anyway. So, at some point, you have to, your kids getting old enough, and you just kind of have to, if that's what you're going to do, fine. Well, when we get to the age where we just going to do what we're going to do, God says, okay, if that's what you want to do, fine. If you want to reject me, then you're going to have to pay the price. You're going to have to pay the penalty for your sin if you reject my son. Now, it doesn't make God happy. He's not happy about it at all. But he gives us choice. That's what happened in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and he says you can eat anything you want except that tree right there. Fruit of knowledge of good and evil. And you remember the serpent came to Eve and said, hey, that's some good fruit there. You really need to try that. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. And so Eve did. And her eyes were open. She took it to Adam. She said, man, you got to try this, Adam. This is some good stuff. So he tried it, and of course both of them sinned, and they recognized that they had sinned. And God, what'd he do? He kicked them out of the garden. And from that point on, even though they lived a long time, they began to slowly die. Slowly die. And they could never enter the Garden of Eden again. And so God says, you know, if I kick the devil and all his angels out of heaven and put them in a place of torment, will I not do the same to individuals who are doing this kind of behavior? Yes, he will. And then as we move on, verse 6 I think we got to. And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemn them to destruction, make them an example to those who afterwards would live ungodly. You know, that's a sad story. It really is. Sodom and Gomorrah was just full of sin. Awful. I mean, it even got so bad, you know, there was 2 angels went there, and they wanted them. And Lot's like, how about taking my daughters? I mean, that's how fearful Lot was of these 2 angels being hurt. Anyway, they finally got out of Sodom and Gomorrah, told them not to look back, and Lot's wife had to have one final glance. Just one look. The Bible tells us she turned into a pillar of salt. We can't dwell on I know the past is back there, but if we dwell on it, we can't move forward. And I don't know, reckon what she thought she had left in Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, evidently she thought I don't know, maybe because she raised her 2 girls there and thought, you know, she had some fond memories. I don't know what kind of fond memories. I think it's sad too because, you know, when Abraham and Lot split, Lot cast his eyes toward Sodom. He's like, yeah, I want to go to that city. And so he went there. You know, I'm wondering if he sold all his cattle, because you can't very well keep cattle if you're living inside a city. And so he may have sold all of them, then he had money to live on. And so, you know, they lived in the city, and evidently they thought they really had a life there, but they didn't. And so God destroyed that evil city. And so there's coming a time when God's going to say enough, and he's going to say, son, go get your bride. There's going to be a whole lot of people trying to find excuses why everybody left. You know aliens got us, don't you?
Oh, no.
Yeah, aliens gonna get us. That's what happened to us. Anyway. And delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. When I got out of high school, I went to work in a factory type setting. I ain't never heard some of the language I heard when I went to that job. I mean, I thought I heard it all in high school, but It's awful. And this is the kind of stuff, and even more, that Lot had to endure day after day after day, putting up with these individuals and all their sinfulness and all their wickedness, all the things that they did, and he had to put up with it. I don't know. My question is, why didn't he leave? I don't know. That's what I'd do. Is that what you'd do, Antoine? Yeah. I mean, if people are oppressing you and you see all this stuff going on, I mean, you're afraid to walk down the street and the crime and everything that must have gone on. And, he's staying there. I don't know why, but he did. And so it really obviously just, oppressed him so. Then the Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptations and reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment. I'm sure all of us in here have been tempted at some point, somehow, some way. And it is, I don't know what the word is I'm trying to say. It's just so liberating, I guess. When you know Satan is tempting you, throwing this stuff at you, and finally you just turn and you say, "Dear Lord, I need you to help me. I need you to rescue me. I need you to get me out of this. I don't need to fall into temptation." And God somehow or another does something, and all of a sudden, that temptation's gone. He moves you out of the situation. He moves the situation, whatever. And it's very liberating when God does that, because you have prayed. That's what Jesus did.
We can plead the blood of Jesus over us.
Yeah,
Satan has the right.
that's right. Do what Jesus did. Pray Scripture. Tell Satan to get behind me. Jesus has died for your sins, and you can be free. Now, that's not going to mean you're not going to give in at some point.
James 4 said.
Huh?
James 4 said, "Submit yourself therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you."
That's right. I don't know if everybody heard him.
Say it again.
Commit yourself.
Submit yourself therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you.
Okay.
Right.
James 4:7. So, he says that he will deliver us in that time. And he will, of course, hold the unjust accountable, and they will be punished in the day of judgment. We're going to stop there, and we'll finish our study up later for 2 Peter chapter 2 later on.